were supposed to do a round two and talk deeper about ancestral healing and understanding better trauma and how that's showing up in our daily lives. So I think a good place to start, which I didn't have you do on the other call, but since we're connected and we're ready to go, Rebecca, why don't you just share a little bit about you? They've got your personal bio, but like, what is this work that you absolutely love? Tell us about you for a minute.
Okay. So I think it ties right into ancestral trauma because I went for hypnotherapy because I had tried other forms of therapy. And I was like, something's still missing. Something's still missing. I don't know. And I was living in Newport Beach. I had this great life and a great job, loved where I lived. And I just wanted to find out why I was still having bouts of depression. So I went for hypnosis, and in subsequent sessions, I remembered, it wasn't like I didn't remember the memories, but I connected my depression back to some childhood events that were traumatic for me at the time. And so childhood trauma for me was falling off my bike, scraping open my arm, and my mom not being sympathetic or nurturing to me, you know. And at the time, if you had asked me an hour earlier, hey, you remember that time you fell off your bike and your mom wasn't very nurturing, I would have been like, oh yeah, she was just worried, my dad wasn't home. So cognitively, I had already like written it off and made peace with it, and it wasn't any big deal to me. But on the emotional level, we can be decades past and upset, and we haven't healed that trauma, and it's playing out in our current lives. So when this happened and I had this awareness and I had this amazing clearing, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do this work for other people, because I had actually been told by the head of the counseling center at my college that I was stuck with the depression and all that. So that's what got me into this. And then years and years of doing this work, so many of our current challenges that we think are just everyday challenges oftentimes tie back to trauma in our childhoods, if you want to call it that, very upsetting events that didn't get processed or attended to at the time. And even ancestral trauma, which is trauma that your parents, your grandparents experienced, that they didn't have that healing either. And then we literally pass on. They now have proven in the research saying that we pass on trauma to our children and to our ancestors in our genes.
Yeah, I mean, they've been studying that with Holocaust survivors for a while now.
Yeah.
The trauma being passed generationally down. So define for us ancestral trauma. What does that really mean? That feels like a massive, very dramatic thing, but explain what that is.
Well, it's funny because in the world of science, it means trauma that you've inherited genetically through your DNA from parents, grandparents, and on up the line that then is impacting you in some way. And so typically what I've found with my clients, if they've inherited some ancestral trauma, it would be like they are very prone to anxiety, but they have a decent life, but they're just anxious children. They were anxious children. They were highly, not sensitive, because that's a whole other story. That's being an empath, but anxious. I've even seen nail biting be something that's an ancestral coping skill. So we can pass on depression, anxiety, and things like that. And then the reason you would know more than others is because you're like, wow, I had a pretty good life. I don't know why I have depression. I don't know why I have anxiety. Or I also see it as very low resilience oftentimes. So that could be it too when you're, and that's the traditional kind of description of it, is you've inherited something from somebody in your upline and you're now saddled with dealing with it. But then I will add to that, from my 25 years of this work, to me, I also include trauma from your childhood, and trauma being anything at the time that was traumatic to you that you didn't process or heal. And so I'll give you just an example of that so it makes better sense. Is, and I think I mentioned this last time we were speaking, but I think it's just a great example. I had a guy in here who's a chiropractor, and he had severe ADHD, and which is another modern day sign oftentimes of some type of ancestral trauma or childhood trauma. A lot of people think ADHD is you're born with it, but frequently the symptoms of low-level PTSD and ADHD are similar. But he went back to 6 years old, his mom, first day of kindergarten, opening the door, booting him out in the rain and saying, have at it, kid. And she probably didn't think a thing of it. He was mortified, traumatized, scared, very sensitive little boy, thrust into this world of the unknown. And it deeply impacted him. And his little brain went into fight or flight. And basically that set a pattern for him. So that was trauma for him in his mind, in his body.
So let's go there, because I think when we hear the word trauma, I know I would immediately in the past have gone to abuse or
Yeah.
severe neglect or some of those bigger words. And not everyone here, although some of us have had that, right? But not everyone here had that in their life. So explain to us the deeper definition of trauma so we can really understand that.
Yeah. So again, when you're a child, you have the mind of a child. And so things can be very traumatic to you that, and then it registers in your brain, in your body, in your nervous system as something traumatic. And then you may take on a certain pattern or coping mechanism because of that traumatic event. So another common one I'd like to share is eating, overeating, emotional eating. So I've regressed several of my clients who've come for weight loss, and they're wanting to get off sugar, back to traumatic events, where that was their ancestral trauma. And one was a little girl, she was 6 years old, her brother died, she was very close to him. Her parents were consumed with the restaurant that they ran. So at night she'd sneak down to the kitchen and open the refrigerator and eat cake for a long time. And then that became soothing to her. And so that trauma set off this pattern of eating sweets when she was upset or sad. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I really wanted to make sure we nailed down in this talk today is that a lot of these top of mind things that we think are just, emotional eating, which a lot of people have, even public speaking. I had a lady who her fear of public speaking went back to childhood of having a father who had this very booming voice, very authoritative attitude, and she was a very sensitive little girl, and he would yell at her a lot of times when she would speak her mind or say what she was thinking. So that got imprinted as trauma, but it manifests in modern day, her life, just as fear of public speaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And the point of understanding this is not to, now I want to go digging into my past and figure out all of the things that happened. It's sort of like Francesca commented here, like I pick at my nails, like how it's showing up today that might be a nuisance or a hindrance, and then trying to figure out if willpower is not working, how to switch that habit. So like something like nail picking, right? Essentially you're saying that could come from something. Like how do you discern if it's ancestral trauma or if it's just like, okay, you just need a new habit formation process or something?
Yeah, I think typically it's if there's an emotional piece involved. So like nail picking could just be, oftentimes I'm wondering and I'm curious if she has a parent who did it or a grandparent who did it, because typically nail biting, nail picking, there's a family member that does it. So they do think that that's ancestral coping mechanism passed down, but not necessarily trauma for that. But I think trauma is if you're trying to break a habit and you feel like there's an emotional resistance to it. I think that can be part of it, or there's emotional stress about letting it go. I think those would be the two signs.
So let's say, let's play, and Francesca might comment, let's play like, yeah, you're picking at your nails or your cuticles and you notice that every single time you're doing that, it's when you're in, let's say like a public setting and you're meeting someone new.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's attached to very specific kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could just go back to something where you did that as a kid when you were stressed about something, it felt good, and then the brain says, oh, that helped me relax, that helped me de-stress, so I'm going to do that again and keep doing that.
Yeah. So she says it's an anxious habit for me, but I don't have any family members who did it that I know of.
Yeah.
So what happens if, I want to talk about some of the other things that can come up, but that's, a classic example. And we all have maybe those little fidgety things or different things that we do, right? But if we notice it's an anxious habit, right, and we don't want to do that anymore, most people try to attack it with willpower, as we know, is pretty short fused. So what is, in your opinion, the best way to go at something like that?
Yeah. So here's the secret about willpower. I just made a little video about this, but willpower is only needed when you're trying to get yourself to do something that some other part of you is resisting. So it might be consciously, okay, I want to stop picking at my nails. But unconsciously, the subconscious mind believes that's how you cope. So if that's one piece of willpower, really, that's the big piece of it, is because if you're trying to do something and use willpower and it seems really difficult, sure as heck, there's a part of your mind that believes that you should keep doing that thing because there's a payoff or a benefit to it. And until you find out what that payoff or benefit is and meet that need, get that benefit differently. So for example, I like to give the example of smokers. They come in, they want to quit. They say, oh, I tried to use willpower to quit. It's not working. Well, yeah, typically it's because your subconscious mind believes that the cigarettes, it associates them with de-stressing.
Mm-hmm.
So to eliminate willpower, two things need to happen. You have to change how you think of cigarettes so they're not appealing anymore. And you have to meet the need of what your subconscious thinks the cigarettes give you. So if it's your de-stressor, you've got to put into place other ways to de-stress.
Yeah.
If it's yeah, so that's kind of the general for that.
Awesome. And you guys, if you have any questions as we're talking, just drop them in the chat box. I'm keeping an eye on both. So we have about 6 people over on Facebook and the 6 people here. So let's hit one of the talking points. You mentioned 1 or 2 so far, but the modern signs and symptoms of ancestral trauma. What are those cues? Could you spell those out for us so we go, oh, okay, that's, and we know then, okay, this is an ancestral thing, and then we can go at it knowing it's that.
I would say 100% of the time emotional eating is going back to something stressful in childhood. And it could be even too that a parent did that. So it may be just you going back to your childhood where you took on the coping mechanism of using food for calming, soothing, reward, something like that to make you feel better. Or you may have seen a parent do it, or inherited that inclination to do it because a parent or a grandparent did it. So that's a really common one. Fear of public speaking, like I said, ADHD and ADD. You guys can Google Phantom ADHD, or I was part of a panel, and there's a Facebook page called The Truth About ADD or Truth About ADHD, and you can hear all these experts talk about that. But in particular, I talk about how ADD and ADHD is confused with phantom, well, they call it phantom ADD, ADHD, because it's really low-level PTSD, which comes from trauma. So those are some very common ones that people see. But it could be even other things like procrastination. So let's just make up a scenario where when you were little, if you got criticized every time you took initiative for something, or Um, and it's really funny, again, the it's very subjective what trauma is. I had a guy who came for golfing. He was in his late 20s. He wanted to be a pro golfer. He had gotten really good in high school. He was playing in the junior pros then. And when we regressed back to where he had this mental block about really taking his career to the pros, he's standing in the kitchen with his dad, age 17. He's like, yeah, Dad, I want to make a career out of this. And his dad was a blue collar worker. And he's like, you know, people don't make money playing golf, son. You know, and his dad was just very negative, and he was crushed by that comment and the attitude and the lack of support. And you know, perception is everything. That traumatized him, and it made this imprint like, I can't make a living out of this, I can't do this. And it really crushed his spirit at the time. So for him, that was a traumatic event. And it really blocked him from success.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I shared on the first round when we did this, so some of you will hear the story again. When I was home over Christmas, my mom was reminding me of a memory, and I still don't remember it, but like vaguely, but she was sharing how the bus driver, when I was very young, made an example of me because I moved seats. And I was like a fully rule following child. It was too scary to break the rules. So like I usually followed all the rules. And it always felt like the one time if I ever took the tiniest like rule break anywhere, I always got caught. And that particular memory where the bus driver like pulled me up to the front of the bus and said, well, because of Shauna, everyone gets assigned seats. I had known prior to even knowing that memory that there was something with the word humiliation, like the feeling of humiliation that was in my system that was like really deeply uncomfortable past like a normal amount. I mean, no one likes to be humiliated, but it's another example of like, I think when you feel, and I don't know how you would, because it's hard to put on a spectrum, but it felt like I was feeling an intensity that was not normal for that emotion.
oh, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. That is one of the biggest signs that you probably need to work on clearing the problem back in time. So if you feel like, gosh, I'm just oversensitive, I'm overreacting, this humiliation feeling is overboard for the situation, my anxiety is overboard for the situation, that is a key tip off when I'm working with a client. This goes back to something else that we don't know about right now. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, and I think it's important then we talk about, you know, in terms of rewiring these subconscious stories and the coping mechanisms that are showing up today. There's talk therapy, which a lot of us have been through or we go through, and it feels like, yeah, you might make some progress, but a lot of that is simply gaining understanding as to what did happen. It's not necessarily what I would call the taking flight piece. You're not necessarily clearing anything and rewiring, to which the work that you and I do, I mean, that you do especially.
Yeah. So that is interesting because you, in a talk therapy situation, typically you may know what that thing goes back to. Yeah, I know why I have a problem speaking to crowds. So you may know, oh, it goes back to this event where I was, you know, giving a speech in 6th grade and I got humiliated or something like that. But that may not change the automatic fear that's triggered in those situations, because you can know something consciously, but it doesn't change it on the belief system level, on the automatic behavior level, at the subconscious level. So that's what I love about hypnosis, is that we have strategies and tools to be able to address and clear the emotional charge from that original event and change the belief that was taken on in that experience. So, and oftentimes you really need both, you know, they're not mutually exclusive. And even what your conscious mind says the root of the problem is, and what your subconscious perceives is the root of the problem, oftentimes it's the two together that really need to be addressed. And that's why people can stay stuck for that reason as well, is because sometimes there's some hidden connections that you don't know about.
Yeah, and I will even share, you know, with my work with you, and obviously I'm in your master program right now, and we just did a demo on Monday, and
Yeah.
I shared on Monday how consciously I understood and I feel like I know the block, or I even know the narratives pretty clearly, like cognitively, but when we dropped me into the place of emotion and feeling, it was like, oh, whoa, like there's still a lot there, right? And
Oh
so
my gosh, yeah.
it's so important to kind of someone said in the group the other day, like, I thought that I cleared this. And I'm like, I have said that 100 times. Like, you are not alone. Like, there's so many times where you're like, I thought I was over this. I thought I moved on from this. And I think it's knowing that you can have an understanding and not even get emotional about it when you're cognitively talking about it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you've cleared it, is what I heard.
Right. And that's why I actually coined the term the emotional well. Is you'll still have sensitivities and triggers to things until the well is clear. And you'll know when the well is clear because the emotional charge isn't there anymore. You'll have the memory of that experience, but you're not triggered in those situations anymore. You're not reactive or overreactive in those situations anymore. Or you're not having the depression anymore or the anxiety anymore.
Yeah. So, and tell me if there's a different direction we should go here from this point. I'm thinking we maybe need to touch a little bit on inner child, which we've been doing a lot of that work in this group, especially November, December. And since we are going back and talking about whatever form of trauma that came ancestral or directly to us from our parents or something, you know, the inner child work, I know for me, has been so incredibly important, but what I've started to realize is there's an inner child at every age, right? And so there's a clearing of certain ages that I genuinely, like, it's cleared. And now I'm coming to realize, oh, yeah, the inner child who's a teenager perhaps is not cleared, and that's lingering, or there's a piece of that still disconnected or stuck. But can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. You always bring up the most poignant points, Shauna. So thank you for that. Yes, it's the best way to describe it. It's like whenever you've had an upset, well, not whenever, oftentimes when you've had a really traumatic experience, and again, through the mind of a 6-year-old, that might be traumatic. It's like that memory keeps replaying in the back of your mind. And so you might have something at age 6 and something at age 9 and and not everything that we go through is going to register the same way or cause us to have these issues. But when you go back to that particular memory and it's age 6, then yeah, you got to work with your 6-year-old inner child. And then there may be a 9-year-old inner child. And so, and you can have your teenager self, and she's got a really different a different agenda than your inner child does even. So yeah.
So how do we avoid getting lost in this stuff? Because I know a lot of people want to be like, I feel like I've been trying to tackle this issue forever. I feel like I've been doing the journaling, and so often I have clients and myself too in the past that it's just like, I just want to be there already. Like, I'm so tired of doing this work. Like, what can you share with us when we're in those moments?
Oh gosh, I would say play more. Play. You know, I'd say everyone that's in this group, we're all seekers, and we're all very soulfully, heartfelt, ambitious women, and we want to better ourselves all the time. And we are wired that way. We will be like that from the day we're born till the day we pass. Other people aren't that way. And it's funny when someone's not that way, we may even be frustrated with them because they seem oblivious. You know, so I I think then it's like, then there's this part of you that's wanting perfection, that wants to just clean it all up at once, and it's never going to be like that. And so my antidote to that is you got to get your inner child out there playing more when you feel overwhelmed, burdened, etc. If you're connecting with your inner child, the one thing you can do, and this would be a journal exercise, was every morning, whichever age you land on that you resonate with the most, or the one that you feel like you're working with right now, you just do like a 1-minute check-in. You close your eyes, take a deep breath, imagine her, she's in front of you, and you say, what do you need from me today? What do you need from me today? And it could be play, it could be a hug, it could be, I need you to da-da-da, whatever. So that's one thing you can do. But the other thing is that I don't sit down and try to take an inventory personally or with any of my clients of every single traumatic event that they may have had.
Yeah.
All I'm really concerned about is what's showing up in your current day life. So it's like if someone's struggling from insomnia right now, let's look at, you know, where does that go? Where does that stem from? Or what's going on with that? And leave everything else aside. You know, enjoy life, have fun, and just let your subconscious mind serve up what needs to be served up to be looked at in an organic way versus I got to be perfect and fix it all. And, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And as I said, if any of you guys have any questions related to that, that makes total sense. So, okay. So let's say, I think we're all clear on ways to identify, tracking back, figuring out, okay, oh, there's the link. It came from something traumatic that happened, right? And someone's involved, a parent's involved, right? How do we then move through the emotions that we feel? Perhaps it's anger, contempt, or frustration toward the people we think we want to say did this to us. And of course, we're all in this group, you know, it happened for us, not to us. But there's a part of us that's like, no, this person did this to me, or I was abused, or they yelled at me, or they called me this name. Like, then what do we do? And I think, because this is more relevant, let's say those people are still living. So you still have to then interact with them in your life.
Yeah. Okay. So if they're still living, where a lot of people get tripped up, especially, again, very loving, heartfelt, kind, caring people, is they might say, oh, well, that was, like, I have this client, he's like, oh, well, my dad was so terrible back then, but we have a great relationship now. And so they don't let themselves heal the trauma because they feel like it would be a betrayal to the person now. And it's like, it's not forgiving them because they're a good person now, or they have a great relationship now. So all that really is at stake here is what happens in those traumatic moments. It's like that the parent, as the parent was then, is stuck in that narrative inside your head. So if they're dead or alive, what's really powerful to do is to write them a letter to the parent they were then, how they were behaving then. So you could write a letter, or you could do a meditation where you just imagine speaking to that person and just saying anything that is unfinished business, or, you know, giving that child a voice that they didn't have back then. Then, you know, so for example, with my client, I would take him back in time to when his dad, to his 6-year-old self, and his dad was the age he was when he was 6. And his adult self is going to talk to that dad, that version of dad, and say, you did this, you did that, and this is how it affected me, da da da. And then what I typically like the person to do is, you have the choice of firing, retiring, firing your dad or parent, your mom, retiring them, or sending them off to good parenting school. And really what you're doing is you're releasing them from here, because this is where it's the issue. It's not with the person over here who may be older and feeble or dead or Alzheimer's or whatever. It's typically not who they are now, it's who they were then. But that's what is going on at the subconscious level. It's like that narrative is stuck. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think the goal is to reach just so they can see the after picture here,
Mhm.
and maybe you can paint that for us, is the goal to reach a place where you're totally unaffected by them? And is that realistic? Is that achievable?
Yeah, I do think it's achievable.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, gosh, some people have been through horrific traumas, and if I didn't believe that they couldn't get past that, it would break my heart. And I 100% do believe you can get past these things. Um, and it's rewriting the narrative, it's changing the story so that it doesn't own you or your happiness or your future or what you're capable of from this point forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And in terms of what it looks like in interactions with, and I'm pulling from conversations that I've had, pulling the after picture of what it looks like with the specific individual involved. I think, we hear loving kindness and the Dalai Lama and showing ultimate compassion. And for some people, they're like, I just don't know how I could get to loving kindness towards this specific person. I mean, is
yeah.
that real in terms of the other person's involvement in our life? Is that realistic in your mind? Like, is that the goal we need to be focused toward?
Well, if you hold resentment towards someone, anger towards someone, you are tethered to them.
Yeah.
So for your own sake and well-being and to move forward, because anger is an emotional charge, resentment, there's an emotional charge. The emotional charge is what tethers you to that person. So you have to start, working on what I call healthy detachment. And the only way to do that, again, is to change the narrative of how you think of that story. And what's the payoff to continuing to be resentful? Why do people do that? Let's look at that. Well, because the subconscious mind, if you are replaying stories in your mind where you've been victimized, or replaying narratives that make you feel angry and resentful, know this: your subconscious is doing that because many times it perceives that if I keep rehashing these stories, I will never let anyone hurt me like that again, or I will never be susceptible to that type of victimization again. So there's a good intention behind holding on to it. But the reality is, you're smarter, you're older, you're wiser. You don't need to hold on to those stories to stay safe. You
Yeah.
can take the wisdom and move forward. And I think that brings up another really powerful point, is that when we get in these situations, we'll say like, oh, I don't know if I could ever trust people again or trust that person again or whatever. And the truth is, Shauna, it's really, you don't trust yourself
Yeah.
to discern who to trust and when to trust. And the reality is, you have to go through a process to update your mind to, hey, I'm not that 10-year-old little girl who didn't have the words, the knowledge, or the vocabulary to be safe or get my needs met. It's like women who will get hurt in a relationship, and then they're like, oh, I don't trust men. They make generalizations. Well, the reality is, you don't trust yourself to discern who's a good choice now or who isn't. But as soon as you realize that, probably the reality is you do have better discernment, because if you looked at those relationships and you could look back and see the red flags and understand, so then the work becomes trusting yourself and to know that you can make better choices next time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of one of the biggest kind of ahas that dissolved a lot for me a few years ago, around realizing there were certain aspects that I did not want to heal because it felt like I would give the person who was my abuser a pass. And so if I could be in struggle, I could say, see, you did this to me. But if I wasn't in struggle, it almost felt like I was letting that person off the hook.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
benefit, the payoff, right? And as soon as I
Mhm.
realized, like, I didn't want to give that person a pass, because if everything's okay, then that person, like, you know, it's my dad, everyone knows that, but like, he could
Right.
point to me and be like, see, I didn't screw her up, she's just fine. And it's
Hmm.
like, I didn't want to give that to him. And that was such a big aha for me. I was like, oh my gosh, you know. And yeah.
Yeah, I look at it, I give a very similar narrative, and it's like, why do I want to allow, because I grew up in an alcoholic home and I've had my own experiences with trauma, and I would say to myself, why do I want to let that person who
Yeah.
doesn't care about me or my happiness or how I feel to own my happiness or influence it? So to me, it's like the biggest rebellion, the biggest like break free when I can say, like, you over there who didn't care about me then and probably don't care about me now, um, I'm not going to let you dictate my happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Shannon says, I struggle to even track it back to its origin. Let's talk about that. What address that from your end, and what are some
Hmm.
of the ways we can do that? And do we have to? Do we have to know the origin? That would be my biggest question.
Right. Is the question would be, is if you're struggling with something now and you feel like it goes back to something in the past, and what you're saying is, I'm struggling to figure out what that is. Yeah, you would, because um, it may not be a logical connection.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you a funny example of that. I had a guy that came in and he had a phobia of spiders. And he was struggling to get back to the origin of that phobia. And here he's this engineer, and he was like in his late 20s, and he's like, I've embarrassed myself so many times, like at work or something, you know, squealing and like I'm gonna jump up on the table when I see a spider. And so when we did some hypnosis and did a technique to take him back to the origin traumatic event, it was a Brady Bunch episode. He's at home alone watching Brady Bunch, and there was this, you know, I don't know how many of you have seen this, but you could Google it. And they're in Hawaii, and the three boys are in the bedroom, and little Bobby, the youngest one, wakes up and he sees a tarantula crawling on his brother's chest.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that episode when he said it, and he was traumatized.
Yeah.
And he didn't, and he's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even remember watching that, but now I remember. Like, and so sometimes these traumas don't even go back to things that have personally happened to you directly. It was a TV show he watched.
Yeah.
So, and so that's why his mind couldn't, because he was trying to think of something that happened to him personally.
Yeah. And so that was when you dropped him under and shut
Mhm.
the cognitive off, that you could get at it through a hypnosis session.
Yeah, there are strategies in hypnosis, and which I'm now teaching in the master class, and I do with my private clients, where we can that take you beneath logic, and there's a very specific way to track that problem back to its origin
Mm-hmm.
on the subconscious level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was afraid of things under the bed for the longest time after seeing Poltergeist and that clown. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, that clown
Yeah.
under the bed. So yeah, you're right. It can totally come from movies or different things that we witness, or probably even, Francesca says this is why I refuse to watch horror movies. Yeah, probably even witnessing the trauma of like other friends or someone at school, perhaps as well, could get kind of locked in our system for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So yeah, do we have to know? Do we have to know the origin, or can we reprogram this because we know the emotion, we know the frustrations it's causing or the challenges? Do we have to know the origin in order to fix it?
Not necessarily, no. And in fact, in my certified hypnotist training, I teach my students how to create custom recordings for people to change behavior and mindset. And oftentimes that's very successful. It's only if that isn't successful, then we need to go a little bit deeper. We need to go to a more advanced strategy for clearing the problem.
Yeah. So one of the bullet points on here is how healing your inherited trauma uplifts women everywhere and helps you achieve untapped ease and momentum so you can live your big mission, which is the reason I'm in this work. So speak to that a little bit. How is doing this work on ourselves? I mean, we all have, I think, a theory on this, but I want to hear you speak to that.
Yeah. So one of the things when I started working with people who are coming in with these sort of top of mind problems, anxiety being a huge one, depression or fears, is the problems, emotional eating, weight issues, the problems are so in their face every day and so exhausting and so mind consuming that they're really not living their best life. They're just perhaps emotionally surviving the day. And then what happens when you clear these traumas, upsets, stresses, behaviors, and their root causes, really is what we're talking about here, is I saw these amazing things happen. And where people would harvest all of this energy that was being siphoned off by the anxiety, the depression, the emotional eating, the fears about speaking and social anxiety and things like that. So you take all of that away, oh my gosh, you have all this energy now. And people were literally coming in going, oh my gosh, I'm going to, like one client, she's like, yeah, I'm finally going to launch my online Etsy thing where I sell these specialized hats for weddings, and I'm gonna launch my coaching business and blah, blah, blah. So I was like literally seeing people birth their big mission in my office. So I meditate quite a bit, and one of the messages that I heard when this started to happen is I was supposed to tell a client, what you heal within yourself will reveal your gift to the world. So when you do clear all of this stuff, it may then, like for me, I cleared my stuff and then I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do this for other people. And I really feel like this is my purpose and it's my passion. So healing my stuff did reveal my gifts to the world, you know? Yeah. So everybody has that.
I feel every time I, to put it in these words, tackle a big chunk that gets cleared, right? I feel like my intuitive gifts like expand to a whole other level. It's kind of crazy, to be honest. Like almost now every time it's like, okay, now we're doing this, you know, or now we're going here with these gifts. Like it clearly is opening up a channel, for lack of better words.
Yes.
Or widening it, I should say.
It does, absolutely. And then that also makes me think of something else. So let's say, you know, out of 30 women in a group, 10 are clearing their stuff. And they show up to that group on a regular basis, or that family or that community, high vibe, higher vibe. The high vibe, the high frequency is the dominant frequency. And then you will, I think, in this bigger, broader perspective on a spiritual level, if more and more people would just, you know, lovingly clear their own stuff and they're showing up more high vibe, that is the ascension that we are talking about with humanity. If you know, if everyone was doing that, and I have some people come in and they're you know, it's very existential and I'm not doing this, or I'm not, you know, I don't have a job or whatever. But if you're raising your vibration, that is your gift to humanity. And if enough of us do that, that ascension is happening.
That is sort of the beautiful byproduct. I would argue almost the main purpose for why I created this community, although that's not the most glamorous selling point. But, you know, I agree with you. I know fully you may not be able to see it directly, but indirectly, when you're in a group that is all showing up at the table to do the work and clear that away, I do believe that it has effects on us that we may not realize till much later, but it's so powerful to surround yourself with that because it is the dominant energy. And I want that. I want that dominant energy when maybe I am going through a phase where I'm a little bit lower vibration. It's almost like I have a warehouse at my disposal then to help me move through it because on a regular basis I am doing the work and I'm surrounding myself with those people. So it's like we share the pot, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
it does, right? Because we all go through our ups and downs. With the feminine energy, we are the ocean, so we ebb and we flow. And so, yeah, if you're around people who are doing the work and on a day when you're just kind of struggling to be at your set point, and you know, you, Shauna, you and I do this all the time. I'm having a low day and you're there for me, and you're having something and I'm there for you. And I just feel like it just keeps us
Yeah.
anchored at this higher place, just having each other in our lives. So
Yeah, definitely.
mm-hmm.
You brought up a word earlier, and I think it's important because so many of us in this group probably can relate to it, and it's being an empath. And the reason I want to tie it with this conversation, and then Rebecca, if there's anything else that we need to speak to before we close off here, please let me know. But how do you discern, and how would you describe discerning what is an empath thing and you're picking up on sensitivities of something else, or it is a trauma at play? How do you discern? Basically, I'm asking what's mine and what's someone else's. What's your opinion on, or what's your advice on that?
Yeah. So I think many people are sensitive, and a sign that you're empathically picking up on other people's stuff would be you're feeling good and all of a sudden your mood tanks, or you're having a backache out of nowhere and you're spending time with someone. If it seems unexplained, that's kind of a sign that you're picking up on somebody else's stuff. I've never met anyone with chronic anxiety who isn't a high degree empath. So this is even how I've just very recently, I don't even know if I don't think I've shared this with anyone, because it's like many of us are empaths, and that's cool, and we're sensitive and we feel everything in 3D while everybody else maybe feels it in 2D. But what's really of concern is where you have problem empathy, where that high degree of empathy is showing up in your life and creating a problem.
Yeah.
And that's where I like to kind of focus in on with people.
I was chatting yesterday with a client, and the way that I sort of have put this together on my end is, you know, you have all these facets to yourself. And I think it's more about, we come back to that word discernment, discerning where to put what. And I find a lot of times we're using, there's a facet of us and we're channeling it in the wrong direction, which is causing challenges. So if you're an empath, for example, you know, prior to really acknowledging that within myself and understanding what it just was kind of being thrown at everything. Versus now I go, oh, I know what that is. And I have a place to park it, which is using it in my business for good and using it for service. And so I find it's like almost like honing it and then going, I'm going to channel it here. And that way it doesn't spread to these other areas of my life.
Right. You're talking about like selectively having the radar out, instead of, if someone's grown up with trauma, well, with abuse, addiction, something where life was chaotic as a child, we can tend to have our radar out and it just stays in on position.
Yeah.
And then you go into a situation that has nothing to do with you, and someone's upset or angry and you're just absorbing it. It's like, whoa, I don't need to do that. I can't fix it. It's not my problem. I have nothing to do with it. And you want to learn to, yes, bring it in. And like you said, it works great when you're in certain situations, when you're working with the client, when you're with your lover, when you're with your child, with your pet. There are times when you want to expand it out.
Yeah. So Shannon asks, how do you deal with people whose energy is consistently toxic or negative?
Great question. Well, I would say the first thing is, if you're trying to fix that person, bring up their mood, talk them out of being negative, stop. Don't try to fix it anymore. And I think the first thing is to look at your pattern of how you're interacting with that person. Are you the rescuer? Are you like the therapy person? Are you the go-to this person goes to like be negative all the time? And there are ways to, and Shauna, you were encouraging me to do this, and I want to teach this as like a free master class, but there's a specific communication to break out of the cycle of letting people like that feed off of you. So there's, you know, first of all, do I need to sit here and listen to this person? Do I need to give them answers to their problem when nothing's going to change? And so there's sort of a cognitive decision how you want to interact with that person. But on an energetic level, you can use these mindfulness techniques. So imagine a bubble around you that's plexiglass shield, and their negativity is just like little black arrows, and it's going to bounce off and away. In fact, I do have a gift for you guys. I have a recording, and it's called Energy Boundaries, and it's about 5 different little mindfulness techniques. I will share it as a Dropbox download for you guys. Another one is I call Raise Your Frequency, where you imagine like they're flying at this lower altitude and you're going higher. The other thing, I don't think I have in this one, but imagine there's a drain, like a spiral drain down below that person, and all their negativity is just going down in the drain. And what this does is just mentally, it creates this detachment. Like, ooh, that's going on over there. So if it's the energy of that person that's really bothering you, imagine it, you know, draining down. So I'll share those mindfulness techniques, but just get out of your head that you're going to fix it or talk them out of it, because if it's something where somebody's just continually like that, you may even feel a shift by just love them where they're at. You just love them where they're at. You know?
Yeah, I think for me, realizing if okay, I don't have to give advice and I don't have to talk them out of it, but I'm still bothered, then it's a me thing, right? Then it's like, what is the benefit that I get from continuing to just be frustrated by this person? You know, oh, I like to be right. And then, you know, and so until I let go of the need that I need to get them to see it or to coach them, or, you know, like until I let go of surrendering rightness, I'm still going to be tethered, as you said, to them. Right. So I think what you said in combination of realizing what's your responsibility and what's not is so important.
Yeah.
Anything else, Rebecca? I'm going to let you lead for the last 9 minutes here. I've kind of like, there are just some organic questions that were flowing so easily. Is there anything else you want to leave us with related to this?
I think that one of the biggest things that's been helpful for me as an empath is really extending that comment I said about loving people where they're at. If I am constantly giving someone advice who's being negative or who is complaining or quote unquote toxic, and I'm constantly giving that person advice, how I see it is I'm disempowering that person. Because on some unconscious level, and I've talked to a lot of parents lately. I work with college students, high school students, and parents will get into this pattern of constantly giving their kids advice, but then what they can create a codependence or this unconscious belief that, wow, I must not be smart enough to figure this out because mom's always telling me what to do, or my sister's always telling me what to do. And so we're creating our own problem with these people, because if you're constantly giving them advice, then what you're unconsciously saying is, I don't believe you have the power or wherewithal or resources to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so there's other ways you can really, you know, support someone and not take on, because what the energy drain is oftentimes is you give them all this advice and nothing changes, nothing improves. They take it, they're appreciative, and then a day later, or a week later, they're back complaining about the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, you know, so.
Yeah, it reminds me, one of my first thoughts with that whole college tuition scandal that went down was like, how disempowering for the college students that their parents didn't think that they could handle this on their own, that they had to pay off people to get them in college, you know, like, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case, but that was just one of the first thoughts that went through my head is like, I would never want my child to feel like I didn't believe that they could handle it themselves, you know?
So true. I had this guy that was super, super smart, and he came to me because he wanted to go back to college. He flunked out of college. But he remembered when he was 16, his best friend died in a car accident, and he just sort of just checked out. And his mom kept writing all of his English papers in school for him to get him through the end of the year. And she did it because she thought, you know, he was going through this deep depression and funk, and I'm just going to help him get through it, and da da da. Well, his takeaway, unbeknownst to either of them until some hypnosis, was, I'm stupid. I must be stupid because mom's writing my papers for me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And she was just, there was no malevolence involved. And so sometimes when we try to fix things, and, you know, so back to, do you get a satisfaction out of being the rescuer?
Yeah.
And if so, could you learn to be or show up in a different capacity to people?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've related to that. I will share that I found once I learned how to channel the bulk of that energy appropriately in the right place, organically, I stopped feeling the need to have to like give advice or be that person. And I would say, you know, prior to really understanding that, I was probably kind of that annoying friend who wanted to insert herself. And I felt like I needed to, right? And like, it just kind of cleared up on its own. I didn't have to work at that once I did the work on myself. That just kind of started to clear up. And now it's just like, I mean, I'll intuitively feel if I need to give advice or not, but my default is like, I'm just going to hold space. And
Yeah.
that's good. But that is completely, as I said, a byproduct of me healing myself.
Right. And to speak to that too, that goes back to the empath thing. I think what I saw for myself was the reason I was giving advice was maybe to a boyfriend or husband or to a friend is because as an empath, when they feel better, I feel better. Right?
Yeah.
So there's some little selfishness involved there, you know? So that can be at play too. So if that's the case,
Mm-hmm.
then take these energy boundary techniques I'm going to teach you. And when someone's in a bad mood, instead of trying to fix them or give them suggestions or talk them out of it, again, love them where they're at, but you can healthily detach from, yep, that's going on over there. I don't have to dip my toe in it. I can send them love. You can, the ultimate role of the empath is not to absorb other people's stresses and emotions. It's to be the light.
Yeah.
And that's the reverse of the polarity. You don't absorb, you get high vibe, you live your mission. You clear your ancestral trauma if you need to, and when and where you need to, and you live the light. And when you're the highest frequency in the room and you can hold that, everyone else will just.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sending us that bonus. I'm excited to dive into that myself because I've not even seen it, you guys. So we'll all be seeing it together. One of the things I will share, and this comes from Gail, who's my energy worker. Some of you have worked with her personally as well. She does the zip up technique, which I think is a pretty common energy technique. So literally as if you had a big, like, sleeping bag almost, just like zip yourself up from the ground up. And I usually right before I do that, will kind of like dust off anything on me. I'll do this sort of motion and then zip up. And I feel like whether placebo or not, it makes a world of difference for me. So I like that in combination with what you're going to send us.
Yeah. I love that too. The brushing off reminds me of a shamanic tradition from the Quechuan Indians in Peru near Machu Picchu, and they'll take they'll break off a little tree branch with the leaves, and they call it clearing off the hucha. Yeah, you just clear off the energy with the little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Rebecca's in the group. I mentioned that before. If you guys have any questions, or those of you watching the recording have any questions, you can tag her. I'm going to tag you, Rebecca, in a question that I believe Beth asked that was totally unrelated to this. You might have something quick to just respond to in the group from last week when I posted, or 2 weeks ago when I posted about you. But yeah, Rebecca's in the group, you guys, so you can find her name and tag her. And then I will make sure I get the Dropbox link out to everyone when you send that our way.
Okay, great.
Any parting words?
Live your life, have fun, and make sure every day your inner child gets to have some fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, you guys, everyone have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in the group. Thanks, Rebecca. Bye.